All right. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee, and welcome to those watching online. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs, either through the security door to my right or opposite the lifts in the foyer through the door at the back. Please do not use the lifts. Please assemble in Hawley Square on the green. Officers will assist you and advise when it is deemed safe to return to the chamber. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? No. I would advise that speakers using the microphones are picked up by cameras recording the meeting. Members of the public in the public gallery behind the speakers in the middle there may be picked up by those cameras and have their image captured. Any member of the public who objects to the possibility of being filmed may wish to take this opportunity to leave the meeting. Would everyone present please ensure their mobile phones are turned to silent and that they are not used to make or receive phone calls in the chamber whilst this meeting is in progress. Okay, I have the following members who wish to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1, Item 5C, Councillor Whitehead. Are there any other members who wish to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1? The following applications have been reserved for public speaking. Item 5C, British Heart Foundation, Item 5E, Crumps Farm, and Item 5F, Crumps Farm, Stewart Lane, South Birchington. Agenda item number 1, I have apologies from Councillor Boyd, substituted by Councillor Huxley, apologies from Councillor Wing, substituted by Councillor Munns, apologies from Councillor Rattigan, substituted by Councillor Towning, and apologies from Councillor Dennis, no substitute. Agenda item 2, are there any declarations of interest?
If there's any other apologies.
Sorry, any other apologies? I've just been reminded. I think everyone's here. No. Are there any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Agenda item 3, do members agree that the minutes of the Planning Committee held on the 16th of August be approved as a correct record? Do I have a proposer, please? Councillor Alban, and do I have a seconder? Councillor Bayford. Thank you. We have a point of information, and I'm going to hand over... Oh, does everyone agree? Thank you. Thank you. Point of information, I'm going to hand over to the Planning Applications Manager, who will update members on agenda item 5A.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief update on AO1, which is land north of Telegraph Hill, just to correct a administrative error in condition 8, which relates to vehicle loading and unloading. The reference should be 002 revision B rather than revision A. So the rest of the conditions include the correct revision numbers, but just to confirm that that's an updated revision number. Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item 4, back to the Planning Applications Manager, who will now speak on this application.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an agenda item to decide on the Council's position in relation to an appeal against the non-determination of a householder planning application at 54 Stone Road. So previously, an application was made for a series of two-storey extensions, and which was heard at April's Planning Committee meeting. A motion to approve the application with officer recommendation was voted down, and a motion was then passed to visit the site. Before the site visit, the applicant appealed the non-determination of the application, which means now that the decision is going to be made by the Planning Inspectorate. Now, the item is before members to basically determine whether members would have, if they still had the power to determine the application, whether or not they would grant the application or whether or not they would refuse the application, so that the council can respond to the appeal, because that appeal has now started. So I'm going to run through the application because I appreciate that some members weren't on the committee at that point. So it'll be the normal presentation and then the debate after that. So the site is outlined in red. The main issues for this application are the impact on the character appearance of the area and the impact on neighbouring properties. So the site is in the centre of this aerial image, and we'll just have a little look here. So it's between two stories, sort of 2.5 story on the left hand side there. So it's the bungalow that's in the centre of the image there. Just to look at, these are the original images that were presented to members previously. So this is the bungalow in question that's proposed to be extended. On the left-hand side, you've got 56A, and on the right-hand side, you've got 52A. So this is 52A, you can see sort of behind the hedge there. And then moving to the left, you can see some developments that have occurred over the past few years. 56A was a new build, a building in probably about the last 10 years in total in terms of the history that goes back. This is an image from Google just showing the sort of roof forms of all the dwellings together. This is a view from the rear of the bungalow. So you can see now on the left-hand side you've got 52A, and on the right-hand side you've got 56A. So this is looking towards 56A. So you can see the relationship between the two properties. And then the other side, so you've got some landscaping that's there, but you can see the neighbouring property behind that. And then this is just a view straight down the garden from the rear of the existing property. So this is the existing block plan showing the relationship between 52A and 56A and the site at 54. So at the moment you've got the dormer window, so chalet bungalow arrangement, and then you've got the single story flat roof extension at the back. What's being proposed is effectively to build I suppose a roof extension, but creating a first floor within a gable which runs front to the gable at the front and the gable at the back, with a sort of up-down roof to side, with first floor accommodation. It does also extend to the rear from the previous footprint of the building, so you can see there's the footprint as what it is currently, and then there will be an extension to the rear, which we'll look at in a second. So this is the existing front elevation that we saw in the photos. And what's being proposed is to keep the general footprint in terms of the width of the property, but obviously increasing the height of the eaves, and then putting accommodation within the sort of the roof form that's created to create a sort of full first floor. So the eaves are increasing by approximately sort of 0.9 of a metre, so almost a metre. They're going up on the side. So if you look at the eaves here, that's basically increasing above the existing eaves. And we'll look at that on the side elevations for the relevance to the neighbours. So then we're going to look at the elevation which faces 56A on the left-hand side of the property as you look at it in this image. So currently you can see that it's made up from a single-storey sort of side garage, and then you've got the existing bungalow. You'll have noted from the photos the step down that occurs in terms of the land levels. So what's being proposed here is that the eaves come up to this level and then it pitches away with that pitched roof. So the roof form that you can see here, which obviously on the elevation looks quite large, is the pitching away roof. So the main bulk and mass adjacent to the neighbour is up to the eaves height, and that's where there's an extension at the rear here, as well as the increase in 900mm above what it currently is in terms of the eaves. And then in terms of the relationship with the neighbouring property at number 52A, so this is the existing elevation that faces number 52A. So you can see a number of openings in that the side facing the neighbour. And then what's being proposed again is an extension that comes out it's about 2.9 in terms of the bulk, it's about 3 metres with the overhang approximately. And then again, that increase in eaves in comparison to the existing. Now, what's previously not been provided, and was one of the issues in terms of that members raised about a site visit, is just showing the relationship with the neighbouring property at number 52A, because there is obviously an extension which extends back further than the existing relationship. So you can see those windows that were on the side elevation of the existing bungalow there. You can see the existing eaves at this point here with the fascia where the mouse pointer is. So that will be increased in height into the eaves. It's not coming any closer in the sense of that's still going to be the side wall, but that eaves height is going up. So there is an additional sort of band of mass above the existing eaves level, and then there is that extension out further. So you've got, on the rear elevation, you've got at the ground floor, you've got habitable room window here in terms of the serving the kitchen to the property next door. What you've also got is a distance between the side of number 52A, which is on the left of the image, and the site at number 54. So the distance between those two sort of properties is, sorry, I've got it down here. Oh, I did have it down here. Oh, it's on the plan. There we go. It's 3.7 metres approximately between the side elevation of number 52A and number 54. And because of that, it's obviously quite a notable distance. Usually you're sort of 1 metre one side, 1 metre another side, as well as the fact that there is obviously an existing, I suppose, interrelationship in terms of the mass, that we don't consider that the increase in the height of the eaves and the additional built form would be significantly harmful to the neighbour. Obviously, this is the proposed site plan, so you can see in terms of the window isn't obviously for the number 52A, it's not directly on the side wall of the property, it's obviously set in that we saw from the image. So you can see that the 45-degree line has been shown on this plan to indicate that there is not in our view, certainly a sense of enclosure created that would cause a significant adverse impact on either the patio area or indeed habitable room windows to number 52A. So in terms of the rear elevation, another of the concerns that was raised in the discussion in April was about the inclusion of a balcony. Now, to confirm, and this is obviously at the rear, this balcony faces down the garden, and one of the issues that was raised is just to confirm that this balcony does not protrude out from that rear gable. It's an inset balcony. So if we look at, I'm just going to go through these ground floor plans to then get to the first floor plan. So this is the balcony itself. The walls effectively the roof it effectively overhangs where the balcony is. So the balcony views are channeled down the garden. You cannot turn to the right or turn to the left when you're standing on the balcony and see directly into the neighbour's property either side. So yeah, just to confirm, that's why obviously it looks on the elevation as if there's obviously a balcony, but it doesn't protrude out from the rear of the property. So in terms of other considerations, we have obviously a change in the appearance of the dwelling on the street scene. It's not considered, given that there are two-storey properties along Stone Road. There is considered to be adequate space either side of the property from the design. There was a previous approval on the site which I've just clicked through to that. So previously it was approved last year to provide an extension which predominantly had the mass in the middle of the site. And obviously in this instance, the side element facing number 52A wasn't extending as far back as this proposal. So this was found to be acceptable, and this is the site plan of what was approved previously. One of the other issues that did come up that I think would be useful just to clarify is there were some concerns raised about the boundary wall and the sort of harm potentially to amenity. This is an image from Google from a few years ago, where there previously was a flint wall down as a side wall that ran down the property, which was demolished and then replaced by a block wall, which I think you can see on this image here. There is a condition which was proposed on the application when it was put to members for approval, which would basically require the retention of the wall at the front. However, it's just really important to note that no planning permission is needed to demolish walls of the height of 1 metre or indeed 2 metres. We're not in a conservation area, so it doesn't constitute development under the Planning Act. So the work that's occurred to demolish the boundary wall to the side is perfectly lawful. But in terms of obviously what we're trying to retain, and the applicant has agreed to retaining the wall at the front, which I do think obviously residents consider is quite important. So in terms of In terms of the considerations, then we do consider there isn't harm to neighbouring properties, certainly not significant harm, and the design is considered to be acceptable. So the materials are to be, it's white clad, effectively, the gable end. There is obviously a different palette of colours in the area as well as a different palette of materials, so we don't think there's harm on the character and appearance of the area. So overall, officers recommend that members agree that permission would have been granted subject to the conditions in Annex 1, and therefore no objection would be raised to the appeal for non-determination. Thank you.
Thank you. I move that the officer... No, I've gone too far. Yeah, I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Would the Vice Chair please second?
Seconded.
Thank you. Councillor Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. I called this in and also asked for the site visit in fairness to residents who questioned the measurements of the proposed construction and felt it would be fair to everybody for us to go and have a look. Unfortunately, the site visit didn't happen, but the presentation this evening to me has settled a lot of the issues that were raised, and I feel now that there is little reason to refuse this. Thank you.
Councillor Alban.
Thank you, Chair. I was happy with this in April, and I'm happy with it. I'm happy with it now, and I'm happy to support the officer's recommendation in 3.1 in the report. Thank you.
Councillor Keane.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question, it was probably covered in April, but I can't remember. Between 52A and this house, the windows at the side on the upper level, I can see there's one. Is that opaque? Is there any windows on 52A?
So on the actual proposal itself, there aren't proposed to be any, there are proposed to be Velux windows, if I can actually find, there we go. So you've got Velux windows, they're set in line with the property next door, so there's no consideration, it's not considered that there would be any harmful overlooking. You've obviously got, at the moment there is an interrelationship between those ground floor windows that obviously they're actually reducing at ground floor, and because of the way the boundary treatments are, as you saw from the photo, there is a bit of overlooking at the moment, frankly, which would arguably be improved by removing the windows in the proposal, but we do think overall that relationship is acceptable as proposed.
Councillor Garner.
Thank you. Yeah, when we discussed this in April, those of us who were here, we did express a number of us expressed a number of concerns to such an extent that we did feel that a site visit was preferable before making a decision. And from what I've heard, I still believe that a site visit would be required before I would be able to confidently make a decision. So my views haven't changed. I mean, it's been taken out of our hands by the sound of it, but I'm still of that opinion.
Unfortunately, a site visit is not an option anymore. Do I have any other speakers? Councillor Matterface.
Well, while Mr Livingston was speaking, I made some notes. It will be no higher or larger than either of the buildings on either 52A or 56. It's currently set back, it's just going to bring it into line. It's not coming any closer to either of the properties. You've said the balcony is shielded so people won't be sitting there looking in the next door garden, and you said that the boundary wall is being retained, or it doesn't need planning permission. So although obviously I wasn't here in April, I personally can't see any objection to what is up there, and I would support approval.
Thank you. In that case, we will now put the motion for the officer's recommendation for approval to the vote. Can I have all those in favour, please? Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you. So the motion is carried. Thank you. The next item, to first state that
could Ian Livingstone explain what happens next, please?
Yes, certainly.
So we have to submit an appeal statement following the questionnaire being submitted on the appeal, and what we will be stating in that is that the council raises no objection for the non-determination appeal. We will put forward the conditions which were originally recommended to members, and basically state that we would have granted planning permission, and the inspectorate will still consider still make a decision, so they still consider the merits of the case. And obviously, we have forwarded on all correspondence from people that have written in. So the inspector will still make their own decision, but we will state that we would have granted permission for it.
Thank you. Any site visits will take place for committee members on the morning of Friday, the 6th of October. If you can just make a note of that for now, please. And moving on to agenda item 5C. This is the British Heart Foundation in High Street, Margate. First speaking in favour of this application is Mr. Peter Munnelly. You have 3 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. I'm aware from July Committee that this was why the scheme is before you now. I wanted to take a little time to allay some nervousness that I detected at that July meeting about the scheme and our approach. We have a fairly unique site building and application strategy. There are some 16 specific conditions and requirements that need to be met from a Part 20 prior approval application of this nature. These relate to location, heights, use and age of the building. I would have thought it's highly unlikely that there would be many similar circumstances, particularly in Margate Town Centre, due to its general streetscape and the number of historic buildings where similar applications could be brought forward. The fact that this application is the first one before committee in 3 years since the guidance or since the regs were introduced also tells its own story. We started this process in 21 with some useful dialogue in pre-application when our two-step application approach was supported by officers. I'm sure you've all carefully read the comprehensive report by the case officer, and I just wanted to emphasise a few key issues. It's not a planning matter, but the British Heart Foundation lease ends this year. I'm not aware that it wanted to extend this, and they didn't object to either the previous application or this one. There are a total of 6 representations, with one being in support. A number of the reps focused on the suitability of residential in town centres and displacing retail. No retail will be displaced as a result of this application, and the MPPF is clear. It says residential development often plays an important role in ensuring the vitality of centres. As indicated earlier, the scheme complies with all of the quite stringent prior approval conditions and requirements. We agree in terms of design and appearance that the scheme would enhance the house building and streetscape with its contemporary approach and high quality materials. Importantly, it will integrate with the scheme below. Please note the scheme has been amended with the upper floor moved back and dormers removed to lessen visual impact. A high standard of occupier amenity is proposed. The flats are spacious, light and dual aspect. Private amenity is provided. The site is in town centre where there is often residential accommodation above ground floor commercial uses. We would concur with the assessment that there'd be no or inconsequential impacts on neighbours in terms of privacy, outlook, daylight, sunlight. It's a highly sustainable site, close to amenities and public transport. There are highway controls to front and rear. My client's happy to agree to all conditions proposed, including the CMP, and also to the mitigation measures set forward to reduce impact on nearby natural habitats. In conclusion, I therefore ask that members resolve to grant prior approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Speaking against the application is Mr. Colin Mitchell. You have 3 minutes.
Hello there. Yes, first matter, basically we've spoken to the British Heart Foundation and they have just renewed a 5-year lease, so they've got every intention of staying in Margate, and if it gets approved...
Sorry, can I just momentarily, can you turn your microphone off, please? Thank you.
Yeah, they've got every intention of staying in Margate, and if this gets approved, then obviously they'll be out because there's nowhere else with the size of the building for them to continue with. basically. Let's start with the other thing. Right, basically, we own property across the road, and we strongly object to the proposal because the height of the proposed extension will be out of proportion and ugly. The visual impact is not acceptable in keeping with the Victorian buildings within the adjacent terrace and High Street area. The development will be 3.5 metres higher than the other terrace. This will block out natural light into the property and others adjacent in High Street and will be overlooked for residents and shoppers. The loss of privacy as the front of my home will be directly overlooked by 18 windows from 9 different dwellings, basically, and it's only 8 metres from the front of our building. The density of the dwellings in the proposed development, 10 dwellings in a close proximity. There's existing issues with foul drainage in the area. The addition of 10 new buildings will put strain on this system. The noise and disturbance from 10 proposed dwellings in close proximity. Access for new residents. Hervert Place, rear of the building, where the exit's going to be, is no parking at any time, no unloading at any time. There's nowhere at the rear of that anyone can pull up a vehicle or unload it, basically. And basically it's an adopted area for all the fast food delivery drivers from McDonald's and everything else. And they've been ousted and they just go up the high street instead. So it's already congested. And yeah, I counted 16 cars parked up the high street tonight. There's no traffic wardens. It's a danger to pedestrians. More residents, 10 new flats. They've got to have some vehicles somewhere. Probably park them in the high street because you've got less chance of getting a ticket there than anywhere else. Right. And I've got a quote from Thanet Local Plan, Policy QD03. Living conditions. All new developments should be compatible with neighbourhood buildings and spaces and not lead to unacceptable living conditions through overlooking, noise or vibration, light pollution, overshadowing, loss of natural light or sense of enclosure. Be of the size and layout with sufficient usable space to facilitate comfortable living conditions and meet the standards set out in QD03. Residential developments should include the provision of private or shared external amenities, play space where possible. Backs onto a car park. That's great, isn't it? Is that me done? Sorry.
Yes, thank you. Speaking under Council Rule 20.1, Councillor Helen Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. The heart of development is far more than the legalities of development. We know this as councillors. We come across it frequently in that there are many times that central planning legislation conflicts with what we believe to be a positive outcome. And I know and recognise this problem. But I also know the difficulties that my ward faces, and especially our high street, which means that the nature of prior approval requires discussion. Good development is a matter of balance, not simply what is allowed. It requires listening to the community around you and addressing their concerns. Progress has been made on this in terms of considering the impact of the upper windows in trying to reduce the impact of overlooking. But the fact remains that a 2-storey extension will mean that the development is out of keeping for the local area, blocks light and changes its character. We are advised to principally consider NPPF requirements in relation to this application. Some of the considerations relevant here are as follows. Firstly, we need to be certain that a development will function well and will add to the overall quality of the area. As everyone here will know, I consider housing an absolute priority, but I am also very much concerned with the nature of housing, and in this case, I do not believe that a 2-storey extension, where residents are overlooked by the car park and businesses will lose light, to be an addition in quality or a development that will function well as it currently stands from a design perspective. Secondly, a development should be visually attractive. I believe that this design has the potential to be attractive, but the proposed scale of it and sheer number of flats makes it difficult to judge as visually attractive in its current context. Thirdly, the development should be sympathetic to local character and history. I do not believe that a development of this size in a small high street with small and traditionally arranged retail premises is sympathetic to local character or history. I see merit in the fundamentals of the potential design put forward, but again the scale removes any sympathy for local character and history and renders it overwhelming. Fourthly, a development should establish or maintain a strong sense of place. Margate High Street is distinct with a mix of small and established retail premises and lower density residential accommodation on typically 1 or 2 other floors. It is again the scale of this development that ensures that it is undermining a distinct sense of place, as the combination of newer design features and the visual impact of 4 floors does not support the existing sense of place. Finally, it should help to create places that are safe, inclusive and accessible. This is not a development that can provide parking or the accessibility and safety of doorstep parking. It cannot be described as accessible or inclusive. I know the limitations we are faced with here in terms of central permissions, but I ask that the committee consider how the design and construction of this development can take into consideration resident needs and concerns. Dialogue between this committee, the developer and residents is vital to consider the viability of what could be a very good design, because although we may not always agree, we can agree that we should all be heard. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now hand over to the Planning Applications Manager to outline the report. No, you instead. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is the application site in red here. So we have Margate High Street to the left, Herbert Place to the rear. We've got the multi-storey car park in this location here. This is an aerial view of the site. So it's this building in the centre here. So it's you can see it's a large building. Currently takes up the whole site. It's currently a 2-storey building. And this is another view, just so you can see the roofscape of the street. So you can see that this is 2-storey. Off to the left-hand side, there's a few other 2-storey buildings, but you can see to the right, they rise to 3 stories, and there's taller buildings on the right-hand side of this aerial view. So the proposal is for an additional 2 floors above this building. So this is a view from street level, looking at the building. So you can see it's a different style building to other properties in the street. So whilst the majority of buildings are quite Victorian in their design, this is actually quite a different style with the concrete to the front and setback windows, and then there's a wide shop front at the bottom. So I'll just remind members later on of the proposal that was approved in July's committee, which was to change the shop front and to provide alterations at this first floor level. So again, this is just some further photos of the building. And again, you could just see again the difference in design of the existing building. So the proposal that was previously approved was to retain the commercial at ground floor level with residential above. And this proposal is for further residential above the existing first floor level. So again, you can see the building on the left-hand side here at Street View. And then this is the rear from Herbert Place. So this is the existing building here. And the proposal would be for the pedestrian access to the flats from this rear access. But you can see there's existing lighting, so it's sort of a safe access for pedestrians. And then this is a view here again with the property in the distance on the left here. And then it's just again further from the other side. So again, the building is in this location here. And again here, so the proposal will be for 2 floors above here, but this part here is remains as it is, and the two additional floors are further back, so it's above the main part of the building, not this rear section. And then again, just another view showing the existing accesses into the site, and again here. So this is the existing front elevation. This was the previously approved front elevation that members saw at July committee. So this approved the alterations to the shop fronts at ground floor level, but as I said, it remains as commercial use. And it approved alterations at first floor level to the windows, and that provided residential accommodation. So this application is a prior notification application. There's been a few changes through the application. So this was the originally submitted plan for this application. So it shows there's an additional floor at second floor level, and then above that, the accommodation is provided within the roof. And you can see that the original proposal was a mansard with sort of dormer projections in the front of this. So just to provide a bit of information on this type of application, the applications come in as a prior approval application under the General Permitted Development Order. The general permitted development order allows for 2 additional storeys to be provided on a terrace building above a retail unit, and therefore this is permitted development. But it's only permitted development subject to this prior approval process being carried out. And through this prior approval process, we can consider a number of different issues. So the issues we can consider are the impact on highway safety, the impact on the external appearance, the impact on light to the residential accommodation being provided, the impact on neighbouring living conditions. So we can look at the impact from potential overlooking and light and outlook on neighbours, and the impact on the future occupiers from noise from any commercial unit. So they're the considerations, and we have to consider those under the MPPF. We can't consider them under local plan policy. So, as I said, this was the originally submitted application. We consulted neighbours, and there were concerns raised regarding the design and regarding the 2 floors. As I said, we can't actually object to the principle of the 2 storeys because that is actually permitted development. All we can look at is the design and the impact on neighbours from this. So we've looked at whether we can reduce the impact on neighbours by changing the roof level. As you can see, in terms of the actual additional second floor being added, the neighbour to the right-hand side is already 3 storeys. So in terms of the actual eaves level of the building, it actually does tie up with the neighbour to the right-hand side. So it would be unreasonable to suggest that from a design point of view, this would be having a significant impact on the character of the area because it is similar to the scale of neighbouring properties. So the main issue from our point of view and from seeing what the neighbours raised as well is the impact on roof level. So this was the originally submitted plan. This was the 3D image provided of the original submission. So you can see it was a mansard with the projecting dormers at roof level. They then revised the application to set the mansard back, which helped, but we still felt there were concerns because it still appeared quite dominant in terms of the views you would have of these dormer windows to the front. And then the final amended plan that is for members to consider tonight is this proposal, which is now showing the dormers removed, and these windows are now basically Velux windows, really flush with the mansard roof. So this is just an image now showing that. So it's from a slightly different angle, but you can see you don't now have the projections of the dormers at that level, and this is the view then you would get from street level looking up of the additional second floor and then the top floor set back. This was the previously submitted section plan. So again, you can see in terms of the roof design, so this was the additional second floor being provided, and then this was the mansard at roof level, and this was the dormers within that front space, and that's how it's now been amended. So you can see the windows are now angled back and in line with the mansard roof and set back from the front. You can see then from this view as well, so this is the masonettes, and there's 6 2-bed masonettes being provided within this space. So at ground floor level, or the bottom level of the masonettes is the bedrooms, and the top floor would be the kitchens and the lounges. And you can see that there's a rear balcony area to serve each of the flats. Then access would be from the rear here, and then again, this area on the left-hand side was already approved through the previous application, and it provided for a communal garden at this level, and this application now provides for access from that garden into the masonettes. And then this is just another section view, so this is now taken from the centre of the building, and it just again shows the 2 additional floors. And you can see in relation to one of the further buildings away, so there are some buildings that are taller than this, that's probably around 4 or 5 units away from this one. And it does show that, therefore, in terms of the scale, it's not completely out of character with what's in the street. You can also see on this section the neighbouring property as well, given the fact that neighbours have raised concerns with the impact on light and outlook, and you can see the distance to the neighbouring properties. The additional floor will potentially have some impact on outlook, but it's quite a typical relationship that you would see within the high street, so it's difficult to object given the fact that there are numerous other properties along here that have that same relationship. Again, with the additional top floor, the amendments that have now happened, this will reduce the impact on the neighbours from this now setback element at roof level. And the windows here, given the fact they're now no longer dormers and they're actually angled in the roof, will help to reduce overlooking from this top level as well. So this is the existing rear elevation. This was the previously approved rear elevation that, again, members approved at July committee. So just some alterations to that rear that introduce some new windows and the access to the units. And this is now the proposed rear elevation. So members are considering these additional floors that you can see at the top here. It's difficult to see it from this plan, but these floors are set quite far away. I think, again, you saw it from here, that this is the location of these, so they don't come back as far as that rear section. They're set back in line with the main building. So here, so this is the rear view. You can see the balconies provided to the centre of each of the flats, and each of them are provided with privacy screens on the sides. So there would be no overlooking from these to the sides of the properties. And then, so this was just to show you again that photo from the rear. So again, this bit here is the bit that stays of the same scale, and then the two floors will be further back. So you would see the top of it, but it wouldn't feel as dominant as it gives the impression of in the elevation plan. And then this is the proposed ground floor plan. Again, not really for consideration other than the fact the refuse storage area is being provided for the units to the rear here, and you can see the access to the units in this location here with the staircase. But again, the actual subdivision of the retail units was approved with the previous application. That was the existing first floor plan, and that was the proposed first floor plan, but again, not really for consideration because this was the layout that members approved in July with the three flats in this location here and the flat to the rear. Again, this would be the staircase at the back that would then continue up to the next two floors. This is the location of the cycle storage area that would be for the additional flats as well. And now this is the proposed second floor. So these are the bedrooms. You've got a bedroom at the rear and a bedroom at the front with staircase in the centre that would go to the top floor and the bathroom in that location. And then this is the top floor with the lounge to the front and the kitchen diner area to the rear with this balcony. So again, on this plan, you can see the side privacy screens between each of the balconies and also on the ends to prevent any overlooking back down to neighbouring properties. And then this is just the roof plan showing that mansard and then the windows. So in terms of the considerations through the prior notification application, in terms of the impact on neighbours, as mentioned, it's not considered that there would be significant overlooking or loss of light outlook, given the fact that this is a typical relationship in the street. And whilst this is showing the height of some of the properties, some of the this elevation here shows that some of the other properties are already fronting onto the existing building, and actually the additional floor would be level with some of the roofs of the neighbouring properties opposite. So I believe that section probably shows this property here that's the 3 stories. So in terms of actual impact on neighbours, it's not considered that there's a significant enough impact to warrant refusal on the impact on neighbouring living conditions. In terms of the actual provision of accommodation within the units themselves, they all meet the space standards. They all have adequate light to the properties with windows to the front and rear serving each of the habitable rooms. There's adequate waste provision provided on a waste storage area provided at the ground floor along with the cycle storage space. In terms of noise, there wouldn't be any issue regarding noise from commercial units because the first floor level would be residential, so they wouldn't be adjacent to a commercial use. In terms of parking, the site's located within the town centre, so it would be difficult to argue that there's a requirement for parking provision. If we were considering the local plan, this would be in an area where parking wouldn't be required to be provided because of it being in the town centre. There also is the public car park to the rear and the cycle storage provided, and given the fact it's a sustainable location, we couldn't object to it on highway grounds. So that covers the majority, or that covers all of the issues that we could consider through the prior notification process. So given these amendments to the design, it's considered that the external appearance will fit in with what's already been approved at first floor level, and the ease level of neighbouring properties, and now that this top floor has been set back and therefore you would have limited views of this element, it's considered that the external appearance would also be acceptable. So it is recommended to be deferred for approval subject to the submission of the unilateral undertaking securing the SPA contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Would the Vice Chair please second?
Seconded.
Thank you. We will now go into the debate, but could I just say I know that there's a lot of strong feeling about this. I cannot take any more comments from anyone who is not an officer or not a member of this actual committee, just as a reminder, and thank you. So do I have anyone who wants to speak? Councillor Alban.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Effectively, we've got a fait accompli here in that we don't really have a choice. Thanks to our government for changing the regulations to allow this type of thing to actually happen. And it doesn't give us the amount of control that we should have, in my humble opinion. That said, because of fait accompli, the changes that have been made from the original application drawings is far better. So, as saying, it's a fait accompli, and I will support the recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. So just a couple of points, and one that I'm going to have to confer with the Chair about in a second, which will make clear to everyone. The issue with regards to the prior approval or process is that it does sort of give a principal agreement to this type of development. It doesn't necessarily exclude the consideration, for example, of external appearance. That's specifically mentioned. I think that there's been much dispute in case law and appeals about whether or not you can consider issues to do with scale when looking at external appearance. And it is considered that it can be looked at to the extent of which the immediate impact, rather than a sort of wider impact on, for example, the street scene. So I think that whilst it does sort of point towards a principal agreement to the idea of 2 stories going on top of buildings, it still does allow the consideration of the external impact. Obviously, from the views of officers, we consider that by virtue of the height of what's been shown and the relationship with properties all the way along, we don't actually think that there is harm to the character area, and we don't think it looks overly dominant, but it is a point. I just want to clarify something that the officers just outlined, that this is actually recommended for defer and delegate for approval. Now, that isn't actually what's written at the front of your schedule, but just to be absolutely clear on the motion that's been moved and then been seconded, that is, as the officer stated, it's to defer for approval, and this is for the unilateral undertaking to secure the SPA contribution, just to be clear what's in front of members to consider. Thank you.
Councillor Bayford. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is set at the top of the High Street, not in the middle of it. I feel that the conditions of the prior application have been met. Considerable adaptations have been made to minimise the harm to neighbours, and we will, as a result of this, if it's approved, have several more dwellings which are so badly needed. Frankly, I cannot see any real reason to refuse this application, and I'm not sure that we would have grounds to anyway. Thank you.
Councillor Keane.
Thank you, Chair. Why isn't there any pavement at the back where the access is? I would have thought from highway safety for a residential dwelling that would have been necessary.
So in terms of, I mean, obviously it's not something that's been proposed. It's the limits of the highway extend, I think, directly up to the building. Looking, there's no space for it, and obviously, in terms of at the moment, there are a different number of accesses that I think most people know because of where the car park is, and coming in there, it's quite a familiar sort of stretch. It's not considered that, again, it's not ideal in terms of pedestrian access there. Obviously, it was something that was looked at in the application that members saw in July, which was obviously increasing and creating flats there. And again, the highways view was that because of the lower level of pedestrian movements, that it wouldn't result in a highway safety issue. But yeah, I think everyone would agree it'd be better if there was a pavement there, but it's not been proposed, and nor is it a requirement that we think we could justifiably again refuse this on the grounds that it doesn't have one.
Thank you. Councillor Garner.
Thank you. Yeah, a couple of things, a couple of points. Yeah, I remember when we considered the previous plan application in July and approved it. I think most of us were in favour of it. One of the things that stuck out for me that I liked was, despite it being where it is, there was some community amenity area for the residents of the, it was 4 then, 3 2-bed and 1 1-bed flats to use on the roof. I just want some clarification really, because now there's an extra 6 flats. Is the community amenity area still the same size, i.e. on the, would it be on the first floor or out the back of the first floor? So it's going to be see if they want to use it, it's going to be a bit much more crowded community amenity area. The other thing I wanted to just clarify, so we've given approval for 4 units, and there's now going to be another 6, making 10 units in here. If this was a planning application for 10 units, then there would be a requirement for 3 of them to be affordable, wouldn't there? So should we be considering making 3 of these affordable units? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll come back on the affordable point. It's 11 units that needs to be before you start looking at 30%. But yeah, it doesn't trigger in terms of that cumulative, and we do look at that as a cumulative point. It is trickier with its prior approval, but it doesn't trigger in this instance. And again, the local plan doesn't really apply in the sense of this is in the general permitted development order, so it defers to the MPPF. I don't know whether or not Emma's going to comment on the communal area.
This is the area that was previously approved as communal space, so it's still there. I mean, it's not annotated as communal space anymore, but it is still there, but it would also be the area that the units would be accessed from, with this walkway being created to the doorways here. So, yeah, it still exists, but it would be smaller and it would be serving a greater number of units. But each of these do have the balconies as well, so in theory they might well be using those and less using these maybe, but yeah, the space is still there. And you can see that there's some landscaping that wraps around the edge of that space.
So in effect, the six new ones on the top have gained a balcony, or they're getting a balcony, and they're gaining access via the communal space, which was a benefit for the 4 or 5 previous, which is now a bit less of a benefit for those 5. That wasn't one of the, what you mentioned, you listed a number of things that we could consider, which was to do with neighbours and highway safety, but the actual people who are going to live there isn't something that we can consider.
No, the only consideration for the future occupiers is to make sure that the flats are large enough and that they have enough light into the units, but there's not a requirement for any doorstep play space for those units.
Councillor Matterface.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, both Councillor Garner and Councillor Keane took two of my points I was going to raise. But one of the objections the gentleman explained was about zero parking, unloading in Herbert Place, which is not that uncommon in towns nowadays. But just a simple question, the shops that are there, where do they unload? Or do they just ignore the no unloading?
Thank you, Chair. The British Heart Foundation has a door at the back at the moment. So in terms of where, it's at the front or the back. Obviously, you can, I think again everyone knows the high street is used in terms of loading at the front. Again, obviously the previous application has looked at the issue of subdividing those units already, but again, there's not a greater conflict between vehicular movements and pedestrian movements as a result of this proposal in comparison to the existing relationships.
Any other questions or comments? In that case, we will now put the motion for the officer's recommendation for deferral and delegate for approval. Those in favour? And those against? Thank you. Were there any abstentions? Yeah. So the motion is carried for deferral and delegate. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is Crumps Farm. Speaking in favour of this application is Mr. George Esdale. You have 3 minutes.
I'm going to keep this short. I'm speaking purely about the listed building application, not the planning application. My colleague Susanna will deal with planning matters in a minute. Our design approach with historic building sites is always to understand the significance of the buildings, the development of the site over time. We've done a full assessment of the site along with our colleagues at Canterbury Archaeological Trust to inform our significance-led approach on the application. On the site we have one 8-bay listed barn, one 5-bay unlisted barn. However, we have taken a design approach that is in tune with listed building applications with this 5-bay barn, so we've treated it like a listed building in terms of its subdivision and its external treatment. We've also got a cottage that we're reusing and a Dutch barn that we seek to reuse as well. So the proposal, if approved, will show a very good development of the site at the plan form development over the course of time. The buildings are seriously at risk and they need a new use. They don't have a use and are in quite a perilous state of disrepair. And we've done a full assessment. We've worked with quantity surveyor to understand what those costs mean in terms of the future and the amount of development that we need just to sort of break even on the site, which amounts to what our proposal is. This is the bare minimum level of development that we can get away with on the site. From a sustainability point of view, the reuse of existing buildings is key to our climate crisis at the moment. It's not highly discussed, but existing building fabric should be saved, conserved, and its embodied carbon that's already been spent hundreds of years ago in this case will stay where it is and we will carry on using it rather than letting the buildings fall down and go to waste. There are a couple of very simple key design benefits as well to the proposals: the removal of unsympathetic and modern buildings from the site and improving the setting of historic buildings generally and in the wider landscape setting. The replacement of inappropriate materials that have been used over time on the site to the listed buildings and the unlisted buildings which we are proposing to save. And we will be using traditional local materials that will sit properly in the landscape. And that's all I've got to say. Thank you very much.
Thank Thank you. Speaking on behalf of St Nicholas at Wade with Sarr Parish Council, Councillor Dave Divers.
May I defer to the next the planning application as opposed to the listed building?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you.
In which case, I will hand over to the Principal Planning Officer for the presentation, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the application site outlined in red. So this is Crumps Farm. There is land also in the ownership of the applicant, which you can see extends past the site and is outlined in blue. So as has been mentioned, this is the application for the listed building consent, and the next one is for the planning application. So we'll talk about things like highways and things in that application. So this is concentrating on the impact of the development, or excuse me, on the listed buildings and the curtilage listed buildings. So this is an aerial view of the site. So it sits in this location here. And essentially there is, as has been mentioned, one actual listed building, which is a threshing barn, which is listed in its own right, which is Grade 2 listed. There are also the unlisted barn that's been mentioned is in this location here. We have a a building that was, I think, one building at one time, but is now a pair of cottages. The Dutch barn that's been mentioned is in this location here, and there's some historic single-storey buildings in this location here. There are some other buildings that you'll see here, and some store buildings sort of in the main part of the site that are not historic, but I will touch on the buildings as we go around. So we're going to start with the actual listed building itself. So here are some pictures of it. So you can see it's had a bit of alteration over its time, but it is substantially complete. You can see here that's one of the store buildings that will be coming down and won't be kept in the proposal. And just some more views of it and some openings. And now looking inside, so as you can see, there is a lot of historic fabric that does remain in the building, and it is proposed to obviously retain much of that. So this is existing elevations of it, of the listed barn. So you can see it's quite simple. It is a threshing barn, and it has limited openings. This is the existing ground floor plan and the existing roof plan. I'm not sure how well members will be able to see this, but this is a plan which shows there are some areas of the building that will be demolished as part of this proposal. So it's this on the roof. You can see two rectangles here, and there is some ground floor bits that will also be demolished and removed from the building, outlined in red here. So as has been mentioned, this building is going to be split into two dwellings, so split a larger dwelling here and a smaller dwelling here, and split along that line. As you have noted, it's actually going to have 2 floors, and obviously it's a large barn, but there isn't a second floor within the building at present. But it's not considered by officers that would be significantly harmful to introduce that first floor element to it, and that's just the roof plan of the proposed building. So essentially what the applicants are looking to do for this listed building would be to update the materials of the building. As you can see here, there will be Kent peg tiles introduced and timber weatherboarding, and this is similar to how the barn would have existed in historic times. The installation of doors and windows are, as you can see, many more than we've seen in the building as it currently stands, and they do give the building a residential feel, but it is considered that it is a way of bringing the building back to life, and it would not be widely viewed from outside the site, so you'd still get the appearance of the bulk of the barn from looking outside. So that's just the upper elevations there, the 2 end elevations of the proposed barns. So I'm going to go to the upper unlisted barn now. So again, some photographs of it, and an internal view of part of the barn and another internal view. and this one does have a slight, a bit of a mezzanine or upper floor inside it. Again, so this is the outline of the barn as it exists, and the floor plans. So as I say, there is a small element of first floor within this barn. And again, there are going to be works for demolition and bits that are going to be removed from the barn to facilitate its conversion. Again, this will be converted to 2 dwellings, so you can see the proposed plans here. And the elevations will be treated in a similar way to the listed barn. It is in a fairly poor condition at the current time, as has been mentioned. And again, these will be Kent peg tiles, the timber weatherboarding, and again, you will see there were a number of new openings. But again, it is a fault that you would see the bulk of the building from longer views as still being of a scale and form that you might expect to see in the countryside. So moving on to the cottages now. So that is the non-listed barn just on the edge there. This is the cottages and some views of the cottages and how they sit. And you will note there are some extensions that have been added to the cottages. So this is the existing elevations of the cottages with their extensions. So this is the existing ground floor of the property, and you can see the existing first floor here. And here you will see that the proposal will actually remove the existing additions to the cottage and actually combines the 2 cottages that exist at the moment into a single dwelling. The extensions that are to be removed are at a later date to the original cottage, so there is no objection to those going. There will be an actual additional extension added to the cottage once those new additions had been removed, and it becomes a single dwelling as mentioned. And that's just the materials and the elevations of those proposed, that proposed unit. And you'll see the sort of theme of materials continues on this unit as well. So now going to the Dutch barn. So this is just some photographs of it. As you can see, it's quite a large building. And that's the inside of the Dutch barn to get a feel for what's going on in there. So again, this is existing plans, the Dutch barn, so it's a ground floor plan, and this is the existing elevations. So, and that's an actual section of the barn. But again, you will see here there's going to be some demolition inside of this, the Dutch barn, and it will again be split into 2 units. This one will actually is in a very poor state of repair, and it's going to be rebuilt, but using the existing frame, and the footings that are there will be retained. And as been mentioned again, it will be split into the 2 dwellings. And just a quick look at the storage buildings, that are the single-storey units that run along the south of the site. They are fairly historic, but not unremarkable in appearance, as you can see. But they do sort of sit, and you can see the church beyond there. And these again, sorry, that's the existing plan of the storage buildings. Again, parts of it will be demolished internally to facilitate the use. So this is the existing elevations of those storage buildings, and they will actually be put to use as sort of ancillary buildings to some of the plots that back onto them. So they will be put to things like, as you can see here, an office or a cycle store, but essentially buildings that would be used with the main dwellings, but they will be retained on site because they do have some historic significance. So just a few images of how they would look there. So essentially, as I say, we are looking at just the listed building consent here. So we are looking at the impact of the development on the actual grade 2 listed barn itself, but also the other bits that we've looked at, which we consider to be Curtilage listed. And the officer recommendation is, to conclude, we do accept there will be some harm to the listed buildings, and there will be demolitions and new openings added to buildings. but we consider that harm is outweighed by bringing the buildings back into an active use. And yeah, as has been mentioned, reusing existing buildings for a purpose going forwards. So the officer recommendation is to approve. Thank you, Chair.
I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Would the Vice Chair please second?
Seconded.
Thank you. Do I have any speakers? Yes, I've got Councillor Moore at the back there first. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Could Ms Livingston just confirm, we use the word demolition, which is really quite negative. Would it not be readaptation? Is that not a more proactive word? Because it gives everyone a negative sense. Just asking the question.
Thank you, Chair. I agree it creates a perception. I think there's a technical element, unfortunately, that we have to sort of make it clear when someone is removing part of the structure that it constitutes demolition. I mean, it is one of those things that in any works to a listed building, when you're converting it from one use to a different use, there will be a change which will probably result in the loss of some fabric. So I appreciate, whilst we're saying there's harm in the sense of the demolition, but in this instance it's very, very notably outweighed by the fact that it's bringing these buildings back into use.
Thank you. Councillor Alban.
Thank you, Chair. Personally, I think it's sympathetic to the listed building, especially, and to retain all of the buildings and to put them to good use is surely something that we should support. As the officers have said, there are some issues in relation to it, but from my view, I support the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Ruzecki.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Hartman there. It seems to me that it's all very sympathetically done. It's bringing the buildings back into use, and I don't have an issue with it at all. Thank you.
Councillor Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, me too. I think it's great to see the buildings brought back into use. I think they've been done very sensitively. So nothing but agreement with the proposal. Thank you.
Councillor Towning.
Thank you, Chair. You know, we have a lot of lovely old barns that are allowed to just go to ruin. And I mean, this opportunity here, we should grab hold of it and encourage it and encourage more of these sort of developments. There are a lot of barns in the area. I have seen some of them actually totally, completely destroyed. So I would encourage us to vote for the approval. Thank you.
Councillor Garner.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to clarify one thing. I mean, this here we're not talking about approval for the actual the proposal to what's going to be done to these barns here, are we? This is just for listed building consent that something can be done. I mean, I'm here. Go on.
Yes, so it's the physical works, the listed structures that are being approved. In terms of actually the next application, which is going to have for us, that is considering the use, the standard of accommodation, issues to do with, well, setting of listed buildings is one thing that we consider in the planning. So, and all the normal planning considerations. So yeah, it's a very specific set of considerations on this one, but it's the specific weighing up of the changes to the listed building still has to consider whether or not it's the sort of works that could facilitate a use, which we would, and those works themselves that we're considering.
Councillor Keane.
Sorry, I did want to just add something. I mean, yes, so the buildings are in a state, they're seriously at risk, in a perilous state of disrepair. Yeah. I mean, they're in that state because they've been allowed to get into that state. If they had been looked after over the years and not just left to rot, they wouldn't be in that perilous state of repair. Just want to make that that point before we then go on to talk about what we're actually going to do to them. Thank you.
And I have Councillor Keane, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm not sure if I'm asking this in the right application or not, but it was just because the materials were mentioned for the roofs and the walls. What about the windows?
It's timber windows and fenestration proposed.
Councillor Moore?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just sort of counterclaim what Councillor Garner just said. It probably fell into disrepair because the buildings no longer were viable for usage and the cost to actually keep them in the state was too costly. And so the listed buildings now before us for readaptation to be reused and continue going on. So for that reason, there's a counterclaim for everything we've just said. Thank you.
All right, thank you. It sounds like we will now move to put the motion for the officer's recommendation for approval to the vote. Can I have all those in favour, please? And do I have any against? And any abstentions? Thank you. The motion is carried for approval. I'm conscious of it's very warm and very tiring in here. Would members like to take a 5-minute break? We will just take 5 minutes and then we'll move on to the second Crumps Farm report. Thank you. All right, everyone wants to carry on. That's fine, no problem. We will go on to item 5F, Crumps Farm. And I have first, speaking in favour of the application, Ms Susanna Sanlon, please.
Firstly, I'd like to thank you for your support on the design approach that we've taken to the listed building application. We do welcome this, and we trust that you'll also support your office's recommendation on this application also. As planning consultant on this project, I'm going to briefly address the planning issues which members have raised in calling this application to committee. Hopefully, this will provide you with comfort that all planning issues have been addressed to the satisfaction of your officers, which is why the application has a recommendation to defer and delegate for approval in accordance with the presumption in favour of sustainable development. Regarding highway safety, you will have read in your papers that there are no outstanding objections to this application raised by KCC Highways. Officers are satisfied that following revisions to provide a pedestrian footpath along Short Lane and a Section 106 contribution towards a possible 20-mile-per-hour zone, there will be no highway safety concerns arising from this development. In terms of traffic generation, the application demonstrates that the proposed development will lead to fewer trips and fewer large vehicles than the current equine use, and therefore we hope you will welcome these proposals. Regarding ecology, the biodiversity officer initially asked for some additional information, which we duly supplied. Upon receipt of this, the officer is now satisfied that there will be no negative impacts on ecology arising from this development. Similarly, in terms of impact on trees, the committee report confirms that, following the submission of amended plans, the Council's arboricultural consultant has raised no objection to the development. Therefore, there are no ecological or arboricultural impacts which would warrant a refusal. We are aware that some comments have been raised in terms of the possible impacts on community infrastructure. The village has experienced wider developments in recent years which are not connected to this proposal, and we understand that these developments may have caused some concern. However, focusing on this application alone, which is actually only proposing 7 additional dwellings, you will note that your officer's recommendation is that the application should be judged on its own merits. Your officer has advised that 7 additional dwellings are not considered to result in significant harm to the community infrastructure or facilities, and contributions are not required in this instance. Finally, a note on drainage and flooding. Whilst KCC had initially asked for some additional information to be provided prior to determination, it has been agreed that this detailed drainage work would be more appropriately provided post-determination, and a relevant condition is proposed. I agree with your councillor who mentioned about the viability being key to why we are proposing these dwellings. Whilst in equine use or even agricultural use, there have not been sufficient funds to upkeep the buildings, and that's why at this point, as is very common with listed buildings, a viable solution is being sought. The application is accompanied by a viability assessment, which is considered a range of uses, and this has been found, the application before you has been found to be the minimum level of development necessary to bring these buildings away from risk and into a viable use. So I hope you'll support these applications.
Thank you. Speaking on behalf of St Nicholas at Wade with Saar Parish Council is Councillor Dave Divers.
Hello. As a village, we have and are enduring over 5 years of continual building work over 4 sites with 4 phases, with currently not one phase completed. As we speak, we've got 3 roads, main roads into the village. One of them, Manor Road, is still full of potholes, unserviced, and is inaccessible for the disabled. Though we sympathise to the plans within the application, we're only too aware that once these plans are approved, the land will be sold and variations will be made. Therefore, I would ask, as a condition of any consent being given, the following endorsement or conditions are included in any approval. And this is through experience of what us as a village are experiencing. Access egress to the site, we would recommend, should be limited to the Thanet Way Court Road route, with no work traffic permitted to enter or leave the village by any other route. This bypasses, hopefully, most of the listed buildings within the village and avoiding the narrowing of the road along the length and of Manor Road, which I just described, the state that's in at the moment. No construction traffic should be allowed to make deliveries or remove waste during the school drop-off collection times, mainly between 0745, 0900 and 1430 to 1545. Access to this site via Shuart Lane is at a crossroads where Down Barton Road and Court Road and the street all join, which during those times currently is a nightmare with school drop-offs, and it would just lead to traffic chaos. We would also ask that all contractor parking should be restricted to on-site parking only. Again, with the experience of all cars, vans being parked all over the village, we would ask that a bond or retention of funds should be in place to repair all damage, wear to existing infrastructure. Access to this site is right next to Grade 1 listed church, the church retaining wall and listed buildings either side. And we would ask that a direct point of contact should be given to the parish council in order that any issues, problems can be resolved in a timely manner and at a local level. We find if we can get contact with somebody who can actually make decisions, then issues can be resolved very quickly. I don't know if there's been major revisions to these plans, but I was under the understanding that some new builds were also being included. We've only talked, I think, raised at this meeting about repairs and of the listed buildings. No new builds have been...
I need you to start wrapping up, please.
Okay, no new builds have been mentioned for your consideration. But those main points, our experience is that we can address those. We should, if it's passed, we'll get a smoother operation. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will hand over to the Principal Planning Officer to outline the report, please.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. So again, we have the application site here outlined in red, and the blue land. The church is here and Shuart Lane running off over here. Again, we have the aerial photograph that we've looked at previously. I will skim through some of the photographs and things because we've seen them earlier just now. So that this is at the actual access to the site looking in. You can see the Dutch barn, and this access will not change. and that's looking up Shuart Lane. So, as I said, this is the existing site plan. The access that currently exists will serve the development site, and again, it will have some alterations to allow for visibility and to ensure that the refuge vehicles and things can enter and exit the site in forward, enter and exit the site, but it will be the same access with limited alterations. And we've mainly looked at the buildings in the sort of southern half of the section already, but I'll just whiz through. Again, that's the listed barn that we looked at, and just a couple of photographs there. That's the unlisted barn. This is the cottages that we talked about, which are being converted into a single dwelling. This is the Dutch barn again. And lastly, those are the single story storage buildings that we looked at. So again, just to give an idea, the historic buildings are mainly focused sort of to the south of the site, but the Dutch barn sits here. And these more modern, non-traditional buildings are actually going to be removed from the site, and we'll look at the proposed site plan going forward. But as has been mentioned, in terms of the principal development, the site is in the countryside, but it is considered to be a brownfield site due to the nature of it, there being numerous buildings on site and some hard surfacing. And its redevelopment is supported by policy SP24, which is the countryside policy. So there is no objection in terms of the principle of a development for this on this site. It is also noticed it is an edge of village site, and we don't have the 5-year housing land supply. So the 7 dwellings, the net gain of 7 dwellings that will come from this development will add to that housing supply, albeit a small number of units. So I'm going to go through the application kind of plot by plot, just to get you a feel for some of the plans that we haven't seen. And as has been mentioned, there are actually 2 new dwellings being proposed, as well as conversions of the buildings. So plot 1 is the first of the new builds. So it's a single dwelling, as you can see here. It's traditional in design, and it will have similar materials to those that are being used, found on the existing buildings within the site and are being used to repair those buildings. So it's a traditional form and something that you would expect to sort of find in the countryside. So plots 2 and 3 are actually formed by the Dutch barn that we've already seen. So I'll whiz through these plans a little. So that's the existing floor plan, existing elevations, and these are the proposed floor plans. So it's split down the middle here. So this is the ground floor plan, and then we have the first floor plan and the roof plan here. And so you can see the elevation again as it proposed here with plots 2 and 3. Plot 4 is the other additional building, the new build that's being proposed. And this is built, as you can see here, as a sort of new Dutch barn, essentially. So it will replicate to some extent, but be smaller, the one that's next door. So it's a single unit again, so you can see it sits there with its ground floor. It's fairly open plan there, and a number of bedrooms up there. But as I say, it will be built to look like a Dutch barn, so it wouldn't be something unexpected sort of in the countryside. So turning to plot 5, that's actually the cottages that we looked at previously. As you can see, at the moment it's been subdivided into 2 dwellings, which have extensions either side. Those extensions, as we've mentioned previously, are to be demolished, and that's just the existing elevations of it. So it becomes a single dwelling, but with a new extension in this location here. And we've already looked at the elevations, but it's fairly traditional in design, and the materials are similar to those that are going to be found elsewhere on this site and within St Nicholas at Wade as a whole. So now looking at plots 6 and 7, They will be formed from the unlisted barn. And again, we've looked at this previously, so I'll whiz kind of through them. So that's existing floor plans, the existing elevations, and this is the proposed elevation. So plots 6 and 7 would be formed like that. And again, the materials are Kent peg tiles, timber windows, timber fenestration, and they're the floor plans you can see. That's plot 7 is the larger of the units, and plot 6 there, so that's the ground floor, and the first floor, and plot 6 there, and plot 7, the larger unit there. And that's just the roof plan. So turning to plots 8 and 9, they are on the proposed plans here, so they will be in this, sorry, that's the proposed ground floor plan of it, and the proposed first floor plan, again 2 units. This is the elevations of those 2 units, so again fairly traditional, but they will from inside the site look like residential dwellings, but from a wider view would look more like a barn or a countryside building that you might expect to find on a farm or off that site. And then you've got the 2 end elevations here. So again, just having a quick look at the storage buildings which you've already seen, they're the existing plans, existing elevations, and as mentioned, they will form part of the curtilage with plots 7, 8 and 9 to provide outbuildings essentially for those units. So to give you a sort of overview of the application, as I said, the majority of the application does reuse existing buildings. So the only 2 new units are plots 1 and plot 4, and you will also see that some of the more modern units disappear from the site and are demolished, and they are not historic in nature, so that's welcomed. Excuse me. So it is considered there will be quite a significant amount of open space created by the removal of those more modern units and the storage buildings that were in between some of the listed barn, the listed barn and the unlisted barn and the cottage. And there will be landscaping, etc., around the edges of the site, which help create a buffer zone and that transition into the more open countryside that's beyond. In terms of trees, there are some pockets of trees on the site at the present time and some soft landscaping, but the site has become a little bit overgrown in the recent history. So this application does seek to remedy that and obviously create more formal planting to some extent around the edges of the garden, but also to add some additional trees here. The southern half of the site, so essentially this bit here, is within the conservation area. The northern part is not, but there are no tree protection orders or any thing like that on any part of the site. So the blue lines, dotted lines that you can see are actually trees that will be removed, and there are some of those, but a tree report has been submitted and has been reviewed by our arboricultural advisor, and no objection is raised to the loss of those trees. Excuse me. And also you can see here that, as been mentioned, there's a number of new trees and shrubs and things being planted. It's all these green circles with the sort of hat crosses around, so there will be around the edges of the site here, and some in this location here. So we do consider as officers that there will be sufficient planting to soften the development and to bring it, as I say, into that transition from a residential thing into the surrounding more open countryside. In terms of the living conditions, given the distances involved and relationships with surrounding residential development, it's not considered that there would be any adverse impacts on adjoining occupiers, and the scheme has been developed to avoid any sort of mutual overlooking or loss of light or anything like that from between the development that's actually proposed on site. Excuse me. The existing access, as I mentioned, would be used to serve the development again, so that would remain essentially as shown. We've had tracking diagrams to show that the development can accommodate a 13-metre refuse truck and a fire tender, and they can manoeuvre around and enter and exit in first gear. In forward gear, sorry. In terms of parking, you can see that most of the units have at least 2 parking spaces, and some of the larger units have 3 parking spaces, and that is considered sufficient to serve the development. There is also a footway, which might be slightly difficult to see, but it's where the letter E is, and it runs sort of from the church up to the sort of access to the site. Is a public footpath, which is the applicants would provide, and that is considered to help with pedestrian safety along that stretch of the Stewart Lane where there is no footpath currently. And the applicants have also agreed to provide £15,000 to KCC, and that is to be put towards the creation of a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit within the village. This contribution has not yet actually been secured formally in terms of a legal agreement. So that's the reason why, excuse me, the application is going to be deferred to allow this to be submitted if members were to agree with the principle of the development. As has been mentioned, initially KCC Ecology did have some concerns about the information that was submitted in terms of supporting information in terms of ecology, particularly in relation to barn owls and reptiles. So additional work and reports and surveys were carried out by the applicants. No reptiles were found on the site, so it was accepted that no mitigation was needed for those. There was also no suitable nesting location for barn owls, but it was found that there were some pellets, so there might be a roosting site somewhere or be used by barn owls occasionally. But KCC Ecology are now satisfied with the studies that have come forward, and they have suggested a number of conditions that have been agreed by the applicants in relation to ecology. So, I mean, I can clarify those if members need that, but they are set out in the list of conditions. In terms of drainage, as has been mentioned, KCC SUDS did require or would have preferred some information to come forward prior to the determination of the application. But given that the application is located in flood zone 1, which has the least danger of flooding, and that most of the development will be taking place either on sites that are already have structures on and they're just being converted, or sites that had other development on, it is considered that it is satisfactory to condition that information to come forward, and it's not required to be dealt with prior to the determination of the application. So to conclude, the council has no 5-year housing land supply as mentioned. The development would bring a net gain of 7 new dwellings to the housing market, the housing supply, and it is a brownfield site, so it is acceptable for development in terms of our policy SP24. The existing buildings would bring, some of the buildings on site, as we've discussed previously, are listed or of an age and of an age to be considered curtilage listed, and they will be brought back into an active use by this development, and so we consider that as a major benefit to this proposal. And there would be no harm to the living conditions of neighbouring occupiers, biodiversity, drainage or highway safety, and in terms of what has been mentioned by the parish council, there is an opportunity and a condition indeed imposed for a construction management plan, which could secure things like hours of deliveries and hours of constructions and things like that. So we consider that could be enforced for that condition to avoid the negative impacts of general construction. We also have agreement and indeed a legal agreement for the SPA SAM contribution has already been received. And as mentioned, the reason why we're asking for the application to be deferred back to officers is to secure that contribution to KCC for towards the speed limit reduction throughout the village. So it is a recommendation to defer and delegate back to officers for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I move that the officer's recommendation to defer and delegate is approved. Would the Vice Chair please second?
Seconded.
And all those in... No. We just did debate. That would have been really quick, wouldn't it? You see, this is why I wanted a break, because I'm getting tired. It's too hot in here. OK, do I have any speakers? I've actually got Councillor Bayford first.
Thank you, Chair. I feel that this application represents most considerate redevelopment, and I think some other members are in agreement. I very much welcome this 7 additional, very well-designed dwellings and the landscaping, and I'm very happy to support this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Garner.
Thank you. Yeah, it does sound good having 7 additional dwellings added for the district. I'm not quite sure we should celebrate that much. They're not exactly the highest priority type dwellings that the residents of Thanet require, but it is a very nicely laid out plot and buildings, or proposed buildings. I have a lot of sympathy for Councillor Divers for what he said, and I have a lot of sympathy for St Nicholas at Wade as a whole. So the times I visit there, it almost seems like it is under siege. At every corner of the village, there are large developments taking place, none of which seem to be progressing at a great pace, that do make the village messy, untidy, and as said, some of the roads are pretty dangerous to navigate sometimes. I think it really is important that the considerations that were asked for are considered and included in the construction management plan, around times of contractor deliveries and access to site down those roads. And we should certainly be making sure that the neighbouring church, which has been there since the 11th century, I believe, is secured and doesn't get damaged at all, or isn't put at any risk. One thing I did quite like the sound of was the contribution to KCC to enable a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit to be implemented within the village. And I would certainly encourage planning officers, when talking to other large applicants for large developments, to consider asking for that in other parts of Thanet. I'd certainly welcome it in Broadstairs and St Peters, if developers were willing to put up that sort of money to make the streets of Thanet safer. Thank you.
I'll just come back on the construction management plan point. So in terms of the list of things that Councillor Divers has mentioned, we absolutely understand and we know the issues that have been created in St Nicholas. Indeed, we served 2 breach condition notices on the different developments, one at the length and one on Manor Road, because of contractors parking not on the site. So we will definitely get that considered within the construction management plan condition, which is I think condition 7 in the application. The one thing that we wouldn't be able to do through that condition and wouldn't be justified as a planning condition is the creation of a bond. The issue with the damage that could occur in terms of to structures either side, that is something that obviously would be a matter for civil recourse if, for example, something was damaged as part of construction. We will certainly, though, take care in terms of what we approve in the construction management plan, for example, where the parking occurs on the site, to try and avoid any issues that could obviously occur. So, and we will review the recording of this meeting, as I say, when discharging or looking to discharge that condition. And obviously the applicants are present at this meeting, so I'm sure that's understood if it's pursued by those that have put in the application. Thank you.
Councillor Bright.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I really like the development. I totally approve of the fact that the materials are being retained. I also wanted to say that I think that Councillor Diver's requests are very reasonable, especially with regard to highway safety at school drop-off times, and just a sort of question about the condition, the 20 mile per hour speed restriction and trying to secure the £15,000. What happens if you don't secure that? I mean, is that a guarantee? Thank you.
So it's a unilateral undertaking. In fact, we've got a draft of it at the moment, or we're trying to work through to finalise that. So the issue here is that it's for KCC to then make a traffic regulation order under the Highway Act. So what would then happen is it is subject to public consultation. So it's that the applicant is providing the money for that process to run through and run its course. And hopefully, because this has been something that's been mentioned by people that have written in, it can be something that's supported by the village, but obviously it does need an assessment of a number of different roads. Effectively, if the development were to start and that money hadn't been paid, they would breach their unilateral undertaking, and then we would look at, well, first of all, we would obviously try and secure that money. If it didn't transpire that it was being provided, then we would move to more, how can I put it, prosecution or potentially, injunction type issues to do with enforcement. Don't anticipate that to be an issue. This is a relatively low amount of money in comparison to developments of this scale. And obviously, being that the viability is something that's been part of this development, we do think it's reasonable and we do think we can secure it.
Do I have Councillor Moore?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm fully in support of what's going on in this development. It's sad to see that some trees are having to be removed, and I understand that because there's no TPOs. But is there any guarantees afoot for the trees that are being planted to be mature trees, or is it just going to be the small spindly ones that we get?
If I come back on that, so whilst you can see on this plan it includes some species that are shown as a list of species, there is still a condition, which is condition 4, which would actually require the details to come in. There's also condition 6, which is the landscape management plan. We know that this is an issue that members raise pretty much every month at a planning committee, and it's something that we've been much more conscious of when trying to work with developments that have actually started on site at the moment and looking to ensure compliance. And there is a monthly meeting which tries to bring together all the elements of the process, from enforcement, conditions, our planning assistant who deals with trees, as well as case officers, to identify when sites have started, visiting those sites immediately and making sure that they've been planted in accordance with the landscaping that we've already agreed. So it's something that we are keeping, I suppose, a closer eye on, because we've now got, we've got the resources to be able to do that, and the sort of processes in place. So we are confident that we'll be able to secure these changes, but we don't have quite the level of detail yet. That's why the condition is on there.
Councillor Matterface.
Just one point picking up from Councillor Moore. Your condition 6, the amenity area should be managed in accordance with the approved landscaping management plan in perpetuity. So that would presumably mean that anybody wanting to make any alterations that would impinge on the amenity area would be automatically refused?
So if a planning application came in that, for example, looked to, the D on that plan that look to put some dwellings on that site. So hypothetically, obviously there is a rationale behind us having it as a landscaped area, and therefore, there would be a resultant harm to both, I suppose, the character of this development, but also the area, as well as the loss of trees, which in themselves, in effect, there is a character point there which is covered under QDO2. So we would have to consider the merits of the case. It's not an automatic, rubber stamp refusal, but at the same time, the condition points towards the reason why we're getting it, and then that would then transpire as to a likely opposition in the application.
Okay, any more questions or speakers? In that case, we'll now put the motion for the officer's recommendation to defer and delegate to the vote. Those in favour? And those against? And any abstentions?
0. Carried.
Thank you. That's carried to defer and delegate. That concludes the public speaking for this meeting. I will now call upon the clerk to read out the remaining planning applications. If any member wishes to reserve an application, will they please call out as the clerk reads?
Thank you, Chair. So we have A01, land north of Telegraph Hill Industrial Estate, Laundry Road, Ramsgate. We have A02, Mount Pleasant, Lorry Park, Tuffield Street, Ramsgate. We have A04, Pierhead Shelter, The Harbour, Broadstairs. And we have D07, land to the north of Fairlawn Road and west of Northwood Road, Broadstairs. Got one.
Okay, thank you. Can we just pause for a few minutes to allow Councillor Makinson to return before we go on to that one? Okay, can I have a proposer to move that the applications that have not been reserved be determined in accordance with the officer's recommendations? Councillor Orban, proposer. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Rozecki. Do members agree? Thank you, and I will, just for the benefit of the public, call upon the clerk to read out the applications that have not been determined, and then we'll move on to the one that...
These ones have been.
Sorry, that have been determined. It's, we're getting there.
Thank you, Chair. The applications that have been determined are AO1, land north of Telegraph Hill Industrial Estate, Laundry Road, Ramsgate. AO2, Mount Pleasant, Lorry Park, Tuffield Street, Ramsgate. And AO4, Pierhead Shelter, The Harbour, Broadstairs. Thank you.
Right, thank you. And so we now move on to the one that has been reserved, DO7, and I will ask the Principal Planning Officer to outline, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is the application site here. There's been a number of applications on this site previously that members may or may not have participated in the discussions for. This is Fairlawn Road leading to the application site here. To the right is Northwood Road. And then this is an aerial view of the site, which is in this location. And then another view here showing the site. So the road is a cul-de-sac. It contains a number of semi-detached properties, all of a similar design. You can see the boundary treatment that runs around the extent of the site in this location here. There's currently an application pending for the land to the north of the site as well. So this is the site in this location here. So it's an allocated housing site. As you can see, it forms part of a wider site within the local plan for housing. And then this is some views from the road looking at the site. So this is the site in this location here. So this was originally a fenced off area, but this has been removed and the access created. Previous application has been approved for the development of site for 6 houses, which I'll show you the plan for later. This is now inside the site. So you can see the boundary of the site is the fence in this location here. And then this is the centre of the site. Again, the boundary is sort of approximately here. And then this is the left-hand side of the site with the boundary that backs onto the commercial of the town centre in this location here. And then this is just inside Fairlawn Road, looking at the existing properties. You can see this neighbouring property extends up to the boundary and has a 2-storey side extension. And then again, views just showing the design and scale of the properties in Fairlawn. Again, this is the other side. So there's a substation behind this hedgerow here. And then there's, again, the same style properties running on the road. And again, the application site in the distance here. And then further along here. So this is a previously approved plan that members has historically seen. This was approved for 6 houses on the site with 2 pairs of semi-detached and 2 detached units. It's since come to light that there's a covenant on the land, which means that this development can't be brought forward. And the covenant restricts the number of units on the site. So the application was submitted for 4 houses. This was the original submission. So it's for a large detached house on the left-hand side here, and then for 3 terrace houses on the right. Again, linked to the covenant, so the actual layout of the dwellings can't be provided in the way it was previously provided, with following the front building lines of both existing properties in the road. The covenant restricts it so that the development can only happen set back on the site and 1 unit on the left here. So it's a bit of a strange covenant, but one that does result in sort of a restriction on the way in which we can design, the way the development's been designed and laid out. So this was the original submission. Concerns were raised with this in the fact it felt like it was completely out of character with the area in terms of the properties that are along this road, with this property projecting further forward and not following any of the building lines. And there was concerns with the properties on the right-hand side, which were all 2-storey properties. And there was concerns with the potential of overlooking of the neighbouring properties from the windows, and also, again, just being out of keeping with the pattern of development. So an amended plan has been submitted, which is this plan. So this is what's being considered tonight. The number of units has been reduced. There's now 3 units on the site. So a detached 4-bed unit on the left here, and then 2 detached 2-bed units, bed units on the right-hand side here, which are basically bungalow units with accommodation within the roof space. The road continues to wrap round, again linked to this the covenant, but then does provide parking. 3 of those spaces would be visitor parking spaces, which could be utilised by other residents in the road. Each of these units are provided with 2 parking spaces, and then you can see there's a large driveway here with a garage, a detached garage in this location here. So this is a design of the larger detached units. So it's been designed to almost have the appearance of a pair of the semi-detached units, so they can stay in keeping with the character of the road. So it's not completely following the fenestration that you can see in the existing properties, but it's quite close to it. It's similar in scale, follows the same eaves level and a similar ridge height. And as you can see, just basically tries to give the impression of a pair of semis so that it fits in with the street. And then this is a rear elevation with Veluxes and some solar panels, and then some side views. So one of the concerns from residents, because there's been a few objections from residents on this, was to do with a first of all terrace that was originally proposed that would have overlooked neighbours. That's gone. Side windows are now all proposed to be obscure glazed, so that would prevent any overlooking of neighbouring properties. And then again, this is the other side elevation. So again, an obscure glazed windows here in place of any balconies. This is the ground floor of the property, and this is the first floor level. So whilst the bedroom windows on the side would be obscure glazed, they've also got rear and front facing windows as well. So there's plenty of light and outlet to those rooms. And then the roof plan. This is the garage elevation, which, as you saw, was set back on the site, and there was landscaping around it, which would help to screen it. This is one of the bungalow units, so it does have a slightly raised eaves level to achieve the accommodation at in the roof space. But they're much more modest in size and scale now, so whilst they're set back, because of the reduction in scale of the units, it's felt it's something that could be considered more appropriate and not as dominant within the street, and something that would actually work in the area. You can see a mix of materials with timber cladding, brickwork, metal windows, and then these are the side elevations. So there's no first floor side-facing windows to the neighbours, and as you saw from this, there's no first floor front windows either. So there's now no potential overlooking of neighbouring properties from this. And then this is the other side elevation, and that's the rear elevation. And then this is just the floor plan of those bungalow units, and then you can see at first floor level it's just the 2 bedrooms with the windows internally facing towards their garden areas. And then the roof plan. So you can just see the street elevations here. So this bottom one is showing the detached unit and showing how it's similar in scale in terms of ridge and eaves as the existing properties, but there's a bit more space in between the units. So whilst it's slightly different, and it's at the end of the road, so actually it can work to be slightly different to the other properties. And then this is the bungalow units that are now set back. So again, you can see those in relation to the 2-storey, much smaller in scale than the original proposal. And then just another view there, which is showing the garage in that location. And then again, the 2 bungalows in relation to the neighbours. So given the fact it's an allocated housing site, the principle is acceptable. There's no concerns regarding the actual design following these amendments. It's felt like it's in keeping with the character of the area and the pattern development. Landscaping is proposed, as you can see in this location here, which would wrap around the parking, help to screen this, and wrap around the boundaries here. KCC Ecology raised concerns with the loss of a mature hedge along the southern boundary. The applicants agreed to retain that. That's now within a condition for the landscaping to show that hedge retained. There's new hedgerow planting along the northern boundary. These trees in this location are outside the site but would be retained, and there's a condition to make sure there's no impact on any trees during construction works. KCC Highways have raised no concerns with it. The parking is considered acceptable. There's adequate parking for this detached unit and the other units, and as I mentioned, there's now the visitor parking spaces as well. In terms of refuge lorries, they currently reverse into the road, and they would continue to do that. So waste for these units would have to be provided on the pavement area close to the end of this road, so that would just be collected as it currently is within the road. Fire engines wouldn't be able to turn within this space because the turning head isn't large enough, so the applicants agreed to a sprinkler system within the units to make sure there's no concerns with fire safety. And in terms of the impact on neighbours as well, permitted development rights for these 2 smaller units has been removed to make sure there's no future impact on the neighbours from any future development as well. So the application is recommended for a defer for approval, subject to the submission of the unilateral undertaking to secure the special protection area contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. Move that the officer's recommendation for deferral is approved. Would the Vice Chair please second?
Seconded.
And do I have any questions or comments? Councillor Garner.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought, since I asked for it to be discussed, I thought better. Else I might have upset a few people. But yeah, I mean, yes, this is the 3rd time it's been before the Planning Committee. I will start off by saying some positive things. There are positive changes to this that are welcomed. But there are things that I really did want to clarify about this. When we approved the original planning application to build for 6 dwellings on here, there wasn't access to the site I think it was assumed that access to the site for construction would not be from Fairlawn Road. It would be from an entrance off of Northwood Road through the adjacent site, which is, as you say, there's a planning application for, to get access to this. It then turned out that access couldn't be got via Northwood Road. So some of the concerns that one or two of us had raised were realised, in that Fairlawn Road then had to become the access to the site. So that's why it came back here for the 2nd time. And we agreed a variation of condition 8 to the original application for 6 dwellings. Now, it turns out this 3rd application is being made because the original one for 6 dwellings couldn't be delivered because of a covenant on the land, which one of my questions will be, could you give us a few more details about that covenant and why that is having this impact on it? But I will say, if we, and it is likely to be approved, but if we approve this application, is the access to the site assumed to be up Fairlawn Road? Is there provision in this application for access up Fairlawn Road that there wasn't in the original one for 6 dwellings? And can we have some assurances that within the construction management plan, that is one of the conditions here, that that Fairlawn Road is pretty congested anyway, that construction workers and construction workers' vehicles won't be allowed to park on that road. They will have to park off a road some way away so that they don't cause further congestion for residents who live in Fairlawn Road and the road that Fairlawn Road goes off of. So there's a couple of things there. Could you explain a little bit more about the covenant and why it's had this impact, and then something about access to the site for construction traffic, and will construction workers' vehicles not be allowed to park in Fairlawn Road? And there is one other thing yet, that there is this other application on the larger site adjacent to this that obviously we're not here to consider, but is there anything in this application that would stop that road, which currently would be a dead end and a turnaround, becoming a through road? Because the application next to it is for many more, I think 50 or 60 houses, and if this Fairlawn Road was to become an access road to the site next to it, then that would become even more of a nightmare for residents of Fairlawn Road, to go from having a cul-de-sac to now traffic for 50 odd houses going up and down their road. Thank you.
So in terms of the covenant, I haven't seen the exact wording of the covenant. It's not a material consideration for planning, but from what I understand, the previous owner of the site, when selling the land to the current owner, put something in the agreement for it with this covenant that basically restricted the number of units that they could have on the site and also where they could go on the site. So from what I understand, they could only have a single unit in this location, and they could only have units that were set back on the site. So that's the basic of what I understand of this covenant. It's not for us to consider. All we can consider is whether this plan before us is acceptable in terms of the character of the area and the other considerations. In terms of the construction management plan, there's no plans to have this go back to having construction from Northwood Road, so the construction would be from Fairlawn Road. We previously did approve that with that variation of condition application. Obviously, there were lots of concerns from residents about it, so we made sure we had quite a strong construction management plan with the previous application, and we had it submitted prior to the determination. So we would look to try and make sure we had similar requirements through any new construction management plan for this site. And obviously a benefit with this one is that because there's fewer units, there's a lot more space on site for the parking for construction vehicles. Whereas before with the 6 units, it was quite tight, and you were restricted to basically this central space and this area in the far right where the parking originally was. Now we've got this whole area here that, whilst constructing these units, this area here could be used for deliveries and construction vehicles. So there should be less of an impact now on residents, and obviously the actual build time as well should be less because there's fewer units as well. So it should be better than the previous scheme in terms of the impact on neighbours from construction works. And then the final point you said about the access. So the development to the north, again, that will be coming before members because it's been called in. We don't have the final plans for this one yet, but the plans that we're currently looking at are showing residential units backing on to this northern boundary of this site. So it's not showing any vehicular access that would continue through onto this vehicular access. It will just all be backed onto by residential properties. With the previous application, we did look at trying to get a pedestrian link from this from Fairlawn Road in through the site, and there was a condition that we did have on there originally to try and secure that. But I think residents again are concerned with that from Fairlawn Road, and I've seen that in responses from them about having a pedestrian connection. And at the moment, with the scheme above, it's difficult to actually achieve that connection because of the houses backing onto the area. So at the moment, there's no plans for any form of link from Fairlawn Road to the northern development.
Thank you. Councillor Alban?
Yeah, very, very quickly, Chair. The principle of development has been agreed. It's there. It's nice to see. Actually, it's a nice development. It's nice to see the inclusion of solar panels and the sprinkler systems. I actually think that's something that under our local plan we need to get done and ensure that every new development has solar panels fitted. And I think that's something that we should be doing. And I fully support this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? In that case, can we move the motion to the vote? All those in favour? Yes. Any against? And any abstentions? No. Thank you very much. So that has been approved for deferral, and that concludes the business for this meeting. Thank everyone for their attendance, and good night.
Thank you, Chair.